Hi, I'm Rebecca Piper. I'm here today talking to Munir Nanji, who's doing his DBA research with the supervision of Andrew Kakabadze here at Cranfield School of Management. Munir, can you give us an overview of your research?
I'm looking at boards, and I'm looking at the way boards conceptualize independence. Independence is a topic that we expect all boards to be independent, to be run independently, to be governed independently. However, if you look at recent times, there have been many failings of corporate boards because of the failure of independence. You go back to the famous case for Enron, you look at Parmalat, you look at Chiro, and a number of companies that have actually failed because of failure of governance and failure of independence. So what I'm looking at studying is how board members experience and conceptualize independence. So my project has been looking at a couple of things. Firstly, I've started off by looking at empirical research, where I've looked at the way boards actually work. I've looked at team dynamics, I've looked at decision making in boards, I've looked at formation of boards, and I looked at corporate governance behind boards. From there, I've gone into the next step where I've said, well, theory tells me a couple of things, but how do board members who sit on boards, how do they actually go about the day-to-day dealings? And in those day-to-day dealings with the board members and with themselves, how do they project independence and objectivity? So I've had a series of discussions with a good 20 or so board members in Asia. These are boards that range from large public sector companies to large listed companies to private sector boards. And I met with people that are chairman level, CEOs, independent directors, and executive directors. And through my discussions with them, and through very much a constructive dialogue, I've gone through understanding how they conceptualize independence. And so it's an interesting part where I've actually been able to put a practice of how they conceptualize it and what the theory is telling me. And I find there are interesting differences and very many similarities. One of the things I've come across, which I find very interesting, is that there are different types of boards, as we know. But in Asia, a lot of the companies are actually family run. So in my sampling, without any prior understanding or without prior knowledge, I actually stumbled across 50% of my sample that were family boards. And I found family boards have a very interesting way of conceptualizing independence, whereby the chair tends to be somebody that's from the family, and the way he puts together the board is very different from the way a private sector board or a corporate board would operate. And I find that that's an interesting bearing on how independence is conceptualized. So as I progress my research, I'm planning to look at more how Asian family boards conceptualize independence and really looking at the role of the chair in that process. Project 2, I'm actually going to Project 3 now. So I've got one more project to complete, upon which I'll put all my 3 projects together and put together a linking document. And hopefully, if everything goes well, I should have my Viva sometime years from now.
Great. Any early findings that you can talk about?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. The first important thing is that when you look at theory talks a lot about the formal aspects of setting a board. It talks about making sure that you have the right mix of executive directors and independent directors. It talks about years of experience of independent directors. It talks about creating a construct which can be easily monitored. It talks about the role of the regulator. And these are things that you can formalize. They're very mechanized. You can get a structure in place, and you can put the formalistic board into motion. However, in my discussions with the board members, I find that the informal aspects actually have a much more higher bearing in the way independence is conceptualized. So for example, you could be in a board where an independent director comes from a very powerful base. He's able to orchestrate himself a lot stronger, he carries his viewpoint, he can be extremely confident, and those dynamics come into play when you're actually trying to bring in objectivity into a boardroom. And the way that independent director works with other people makes a difference. People talk about boardrooms being the altar where decisions take place. But you find, talking to board members, a lot of decision making takes place outside the boardroom, where non-independent directors get together and they discuss what they feel they should be discussing in a boardroom. So discussions outside the boardroom are actually a lot more important than discussions in the boardroom. And these are very informal. You then look at discussions around the role of the CEO and the chair, whereby the CEO, who runs the company on a day-to-day basis, has a very different view when it comes to the way he actually manages a board setting. The chair, at the end of the day, could have a lot more overriding opinion in the way he wants to guide the company. So despite what people think, the chair might be an overpowering figure that could drive things in a very different way. So you find the formal aspects and the informal aspects both together actually help drive independence. It's just not one. I also found that there are things around the way people actually come together in committees. Boards have very many committees. You have the audit committee, remuneration committee, and the accounting committee. And you find committees actually make a lot of decisions that eventually get passed to the board level. So making sure that the committees are governed and run in an effective manner has a bearing on how independence is conceptualized in the board.
Fascinating. We look forward to hearing more about your research results.
Thank you.
Thanks, Munir.